Imagine this. It's 221 BCE. For centuries, China isn't really China at all. It's 7 warring kingdoms, constantly fighting, never stopping. Blood, territory, endless conflict. Then one man changes everything. His name is Qin Shi Huang, and he does something nobody thought was possible. He conquers all 7 kingdoms and unites them into a single empire. He's not done yet. Qin Shi Huang builds infrastructure so ambitious, so massive, that pieces of it still survive today. The Great Wall, roads, entire cities. The guy is basically reshaping the landscape with his bare hands. Well, with hundreds of thousands of workers anyway. But here's the thing. Despite unifying an entire civilization and leaving monuments that would outlast empires, his own dynasty doesn't even make it through 1 generation. Within 15 years of his death, everything he built comes crashing down. His sons are fighting each other. Rebellion spreads across the empire. The whole system collapses. So what went wrong? How do you take a unified empire and destroy it that quickly? The answer lies in the very methods Qin Shi Huang used to build it in the first place. We're talking the Warring States period. Imagine a map of China completely fractured into 7 major kingdoms, and these weren't just having diplomatic disagreements. They were constantly, relentlessly fighting each other. No breaks, no mercy. Now, you might think they'd at least trade with each other. Right, wrong. Each kingdom had its own currency, its own writing system. Even their measurement standards were completely different. If a merchant from one state tried to do business in another, they'd be completely lost. It was deliberately fragmented, designed to keep these kingdoms isolated and weak. But then one kingdom started rising above the rest, the state of Qin, located out in the brutal northwest frontier. And here's where it gets interesting. They didn't win through kindness or clever diplomacy. The Qin adopted a philosophy called legalism, extreme control, harsh punishment, absolute obedience to the state. Think of it like this. If you broke the law in Qin, you didn't just get punished, your entire family faced consequences. It was ruthless, but it worked. It unified their people in ways no other state had managed. And by the 3rd century BCE, Qin wasn't just the strongest kingdom anymore. They were unstoppable, which means they were ready to do something nobody had ever done before. He had generals, brilliant, ruthless generals, and between 230 and 221 BCE, they systematically crushed every rival state in China, one by one, like dominoes. Imagine having 7 major powers all competing for the same land, and then, in just 9 years, they're all gone. But conquering territory is one thing. Holding it together, that's where Qin Shi Huang was a genius. He realized you can't rule an empire if everyone speaks different dialects, uses different money, or measures things differently. So he standardized everything: writing, currency, measurements, even the width of cart axles, because if your axles don't match the ruts in the road, you're stuck. Then came the infrastructure. 4,000 miles of roads, connecting everything, connecting everyone. You could travel from one end of China to the other, on roads built by the same empire, speaking the same language, using the same money. And then, this is wild, he took all the old defensive walls his conquered states had built and connected them into something massive, something that would define China for the next 2,000 years. The Great Wall. But here's where it gets dark, really dark, because building an empire this fast, it comes with a terrible cost. The man who unified China became obsessed with one thing: living forever. He sent expeditions searching for immortality elixirs. He consulted alchemists. He actually drank mercury thinking it would make him eternal. Spoiler alert. It didn't. Imagine being so powerful that when your own philosophy gets challenged, you don't just disagree, you erase it entirely. That's what happened. Qin Shi Huang ordered the burning of books, thousands of texts destroyed, Confucian teachings, rival philosophies, historical records, gone. He wanted one truth, his truth. But wait, it gets darker. Scholars who publicly disagreed with him, He had them buried alive, hundreds of them, literally entombed while still breathing. This wasn't justice. This was terror. Now, remember that terracotta army we mentioned? Building it required 700,000 workers. Think about that number. Over 500,000 people conscripted, many never returning home. The whole empire was taxed to death funding this massive mausoleum. A tomb for a man terrified of dying. Massive taxes, forced labor, economic collapse spreading like a plague across the empire. The people were suffering, starving, resentful. And that's when the cracks began to show, when discontent turned into something far more dangerous. Emperor Qin Shi Huang had unified China, but he wasn't done building roads, canals, massive palaces, the Great Wall itself. All of it demanded resources, massive resources. And guess who paid? Not the wealthy nobles sitting in their estates, the peasants. Imagine this. You're a farmer in 210 BCE. The emperor demands your sons for construction crews. Your taxes quadruple to fund his monuments. Your crops, they're being requisitioned for the work gangs. People were literally starving while their hands built the empire's glory. But wait, there's more. Qin Shi Huang dies in 210 BCE. And suddenly, this iron grip everyone feared, gone. Almost immediately the anger exploded. Peasant rebellions erupted everywhere. Entire regions rose up at once. But here's what nobody expected. They actually won. The army, that supposedly invincible force, could be beaten by desperate farmers with nothing left to lose. The most famous was the Dazexiang uprising. A ragtag group of conscripted soldiers and peasants literally toppled imperial battalions. The message was clear. The regime wasn't just unpopular anymore. It was finished. So how did an empire that conquered the world crumble so fast? The answer will shock you. Qin Shi Huang ruled for 21 years. The dynasty he built, 15 years after his death. That's not a coincidence. That's a mathematical certainty. When Qin Shi Huang died, his son took the throne. But, and this is crucial, his son wasn't Qin Shi Huang. Not even close. He was weak, indecisive. Imagine handing nuclear codes to someone who can't make decisions at noon. That's essentially what happened here. Into that vacuum stepped the eunuchs, palace insiders who'd whispered in the emperor's ear for years. Now they had a puppet, not a ruler. And the generals, they were watching. They saw a young emperor who couldn't command respect. They saw their moment. Provinces started declaring independence. Generals raised armies. And nobody, and I mean nobody, had the charisma or the raw force to put them back in their box. The system Qin Shi Huang built was brilliant, but it was built entirely on fear, on one man's will crushing everything in its path. But when that man dies, when fear is your only glue, everything comes apart. The empire didn't collapse because it was weak, it collapsed because it was fragile. And fragile systems don't just crack, they shatter. But who actually won when the dust settled? That's where it gets interesting. Gone. Finished. But its legacy? That lasted 2,000 years, and counting. Imagine building something so fundamentally solid that every single empire that comes after you just copies it. That's what Qin Shi Huang did. Every Chinese dynasty, after the Qin, and there were many, they all kept his bureaucratic system, the exams for officials, the centralized government structure, the hierarchies. They tweaked it, sure. They added their own flavors. But the blueprint, pure Qin. And it wasn't just administration, the Great Wall. Those incredible roads connecting the empire, even the standardized writing system, these weren't just practical solutions. They became the eternal symbols of what China is. You see them today, and you think, this is ancient China. This is timeless. But here's where it gets interesting. Historians will tell you the Han Dynasty, the one that came right after. They figured out what Qin got wrong. Balance. Mercy. You don't have to rule with an iron fist to be effective. The Han proved that. They took Qin's genius infrastructure and systems, then softened the brutality. So Qin Shi Huang became this paradox. Genius and tyrant. Visionary and monster. History couldn't quite decide what to do with him. But his real story, that's still unfolding, but it fell just as fast. And that collapse teaches us something that echoes through the centuries. You can unite an empire by force. Sure, legalism works. Standardization works. The threat of punishment works. But, and this is crucial, you can't hold it that way, not forever. Because eventually people break, they revolt, they remember what life was like before the crushing taxes and the endless labor. Qin Shi Huang had ambition, incredible ambition, but here's what he lacked: wisdom. He saw problems and swung a sledgehammer. Books, burn them. Dissent, execute it. Questions about his power. That's treason. Ambition without wisdom doesn't create dynasties, it creates dust. 15 years, that's all it took for everything to crumble. Imagine building something so massive, pouring so much power into it, only to watch it collapse within your lifetime. But, and wait for this, the monuments survived, the Great Wall still stands, the terracotta army still guards its emperor, the roads still connect the empire. Sometimes your greatest works outlive your regime entirely.